Welcome back to Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We have back in the studio real estate attorney Dean Rossi. Dean was here 150 shows ago. And one of our favorite guests, Jim Harrison, the CEO of the local multiple listing service. Welcome, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are here today, gathered here today, to discuss off-MLS listings. Pocket listings, whisper listings. Jim, let's start with you. What is a off-MLS listing, whisper listing, pocket listing?
So pocket listings have always existed. It's just since the recession, they've become more of a business practice than they were before. So now there's a whole practice around marketing off the MLS before you actually put it in the MLS. And some of them never make it into the MLS. And so we call them pocket listings or whisper listings, or if you drive around the neighborhood, they'll have a coming soon sign in the yard, but they're not in the MLS. And so they're properties that not everybody that subscribes to the MLS has access to.
Okay, for the lay people out there, MLS stands for?
Multiple listing service. So it's a cooperative that offers the offer of compensation and cooperation between real estate professionals.
So when a licensee is hired by a seller, they put the house, condo, townhouse, fourplex, whatever, onto your service, the multiple listing service.
Yes.
And it's shared with how many people?
Well, it's shared with our 17,000 subscribers,
Wow.
but also we're in reciprocal linking arrangements with Southern California, so there's 100,000 realtors down there that see them. And then up here in the Bay Area with the East Bay, Sacramento, San Francisco, there's another 45,000 realtors that have access to the listings in our service, and those agents have clients.
Now, you have also mentioned in the past everybody has smartphones now and tablets, iPads, and whatnot. There's over 300 vendors that also get our data?
Right. We light up vendors that brokers ask us to light up. And then there's the portals that we're broker opt-in to send listings to the portals. But yeah, there's 300 third-party vendors that get access, that have access to our data.
And hundreds of websites.
Thousands of websites.
Thousands of websites. Okay, it's a good lead-in for Dean, our real estate attorney. Dean, we have spoken in the past about the licensee. They're at the kitchen table of the seller. They're talking about what they are going to do to sell the property. In the past, it was very common to put the house on the multiple listing service and then have broker tours, open houses, newspaper ads. Can you speak to the agency relationship between a licensee and a seller?
Sure. The duty between a licensee and the principal, whether it be a seller or a buyer, they owe a fiduciary duty. And a fiduciary duty is very similar to a duty a lawyer has, for example, to his or her client.
Right.
It's the highest good faith. You are looking out for their best interest, highest loyalty.
Yeah.
And in this situation where you're having a seller and a real estate licensee, one of the duties is to sit down and review the documents with that licensee. But when we talk about pocket listings, you also want to get the highest and best price for the principal.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have spoken about the licensee will oftentimes, the agent will tell the seller, just sign here, sign this. And the seller will often later say, they just told me to sign here.
Well, we see that a lot. I mean, you look at the type of forms, it's almost overwhelming when you're a buyer or a seller and you receive all of these forms and all of these disclosures. A lot of them are mandatory and required by California law. The purchase contract itself, I think, is 10, 11 pages, depending upon the type of form you use. So oftentimes you see situations, as a lawyer I see them a lot, where the real estate agent's really just sitting there saying sign here, and sign here. And you see that with DocuSign right away, where you're really not sitting down, the licensee is not sitting down with the principal at the kitchen table, at the conference room table, and discussing the consequences of the transaction, what the documents mean, both from what they say and also what they mean, the ramifications or consequences of by signing them.
So you, in terms of DocuSign, that means signatures on digital paperwork on the internet.
Right. DocuSign's great. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a great service. You can do things from away. I have clients, for example, who are over in Europe or on vacation or in a different state, and they can sign things. The problem, or the potential problem, is that the licensee is not spending the time to sit down at the kitchen table and reviewing it with that person to make sure they have some understanding.
Right. Now, I've been associated with you and your firms for a long time. That was a big item years ago where the prospective buyer's agent or seller's agent would sit down and review all that paperwork.
Right, and that's very, very important. I think when we come down to pocket listings as well, you know, a lot of these forms will say, hey, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are agreeing to you know, have a pocket listing with me, and they sort of don't review the form with them, so they really understand what the form means. I mean, look, it's simple economics. The more you expose your house to the market, the higher price you're going to get. And especially in this market, in the Silicon Valley, houses are selling for well over market price. There's very low inventory. You're having multiple offers. There's non-contingent offers. And by not opening it to the open market, the percentage is something like 20%, 15 to 25%, depending upon where you are. You're going to see an increase in purchase price if you put it on the MLS. If you don't, you open the house to less competition, and you have less exposure, and you typically get a lower price.
Okay, that's a perfect lead-in, Jim. Why is it important to have it on? We have these great slides here, why it matters. Can we go to the Code of Ethics?
Well, it's just like the fiduciary responsibility goes, the Code of Ethics does obligate an agent to get highest and best price for the property for his clients. And so not doing that, he does violate the Code of Ethics.
Now also we have, now that's for the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, which is over 100 years old. And then the multiple listing services that agents across the country put together, you also have a code of conduct, right?
Well, we have rules in the MLS system, and so we're a mandatory submission MLS. And so if you take a listing, you're supposed to put it in the MLS unless the seller excludes it, intentionally excludes it from the MLS.
Okay, now because I've been recruited for dispute resolution for both boards here, Santa Clara County Association of Realtors and Silicon Valley Association of Realtors, and part of the penalty, so to speak, is that we will revoke or suspend their MLS membership.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Now, so that's really a tricky part about you were signing up to put your house, your clients' homes, properties on the MLS, and then you decide not to. How does that play out in terms of the paperwork?
So in our world, if there's a property marketed off the MLS and it wasn't excluded, there's a fine for that. We're not kicking you out of the MLS because there's more legal risk involved in that because we're a natural monopoly and they have no other option on where to go on the business platform they need to use. But our fine doubles every time it's done, and agents turn each other in for advertising properties without having excluded them because you can look up exclusions in our service.
Okay. Now, in terms of, Dean, let's get back to the legal side of it. We often have what started at the Great Recession. We had over 18,000 listings on the multiple listing service, and everybody was putting their homes on the multiple. All the agents were putting their properties on the MLS, open houses, newspaper ads, talking about the broker tours. And then as the market started to recede, there were fewer paychecks for the licensees, and we started to see this explosion of off-MLS.
Right.
They were selling it in-house.
Right.
So can you speak about the agency in California? Is the person the agent or the agency the agent?
The broker is where you test it. At the broker's level is where you test the agency, but your agent, your broker, owes the client a fiduciary duty. And that's not to say, for example, that there are situations where you might have a pocket listing or things off the MLS. For example, I've had a few cases where, let's just take, for example, you have a widow, you have an older person in the home who may have some health issues, doesn't want to leave the house for open houses, doesn't have the ability. You can obviously have situations like that.
That are perfectly legit.
Perfectly legit, where you can have an exclusion from the MLS. I think the point is, from a legal perspective, you really want to make sure, if you're a licensee, that you explain it to your principal as to what it means.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what we see litigation as lawyers, we see litigation where the house, the principal is not explained, not told that you can get a lot of money, more, if you open it to the open market or put it in the open market. And then they say, wait a minute, I wasn't told. So there are these forms that are created twofold. They help the agent to make sure that the buyer or seller knows what's happening, but there's no substitute for the agent to sit down and review that with that person to make sure the seller knows. Now, I can tell you, as a lawyer, I can't tell you how many cases I have where we're in deposition. It takes place at the kitchen table or at the conference room table. And you never know who says what. I think the buyer or seller will pass a lie detector test as to what the agent said, and the agent says, I said this. So it comes to a he said, she said. It's really important to document and make sure you have those forms filled out. Make sure you sit there with your client, especially something like this. Because if your responsibility as an agent is to get the highest and best price, you want to make sure you don't have liability later on where the heirs of the seller or the seller downstream comes down and say, wait a minute, you never explained to me that I could get $200,000 more if I opened it on the open market. I didn't care that much that someone walking through my house.
Sure.
So it's really important to make sure that you have that candid, frank, open conversation, explain it, and make sure they understand it.
Because that's important too in terms of when it is off MLS and the agents, oftentimes they're getting calls from other agents, and the listing agent that has it off MLS says, sorry, I'm sorry, this is exclusive. And then 2 days later, a buyer calls in and says, oh, sure, I could show it tonight at 8 o'clock, or would 7 o'clock be better? So in that type of situation, that particular agent could be driving to earn 2 paychecks.
Right. Well, listen, I mean, typically, most people have some relationship with their real estate agent. There's some familiar relationship or a friend of a friend, and you have that trust. And we've talked a little bit about how being on the MLS sort of creates that trust, or you lose that trust if you're not on MLS. But the agent, principal agent, you have this issue of trust. You have this trust that's going on, and it's very important you do explain it. The problem becomes, and you talked about the recession, is there are some agents who, if it's not 2.5% or 3%, it's 5.5% or 6%, and they'd rather take 6 than 3. So you're really talking about money. The problem is the principal's also losing a lot of money in that transaction.
Now, Jim, let's get back in terms of your slides here on page 4. What does it mean in terms of the impact to have it off MLS?
What this means is, multiple listing service is all about the data, and agents need the data to do their job. They need data to do comparative market analysis, to do appraisals, need the data to do appraisals with. It affects compensation. If the data's not in there, then somebody needs an opportunity to try to help sell it. I think it creates a trust problem. It breaks down the collaboration and cooperation between the agents as well, because that's the fundamental basis of why a multiple listing service exists. It's a unilateral offering of compensation and cooperation in the service. And so when you're selling your products off the market, then it's not fair to everybody else. It's not fair for the clients either.
You have spoken well about this in the past, where it's unusual to have competitors still get together and share information fairly.
It is, but that's the platform for organized real estate, and it's worked very well for 100 years.
Now, in terms of the risks are amplified, when you talk about the comps, let's talk about, what does a comp stand for?
Comparative property.
Okay.
So if you're looking at taking a listing or bringing an offer for a listing, you're going to look at similar properties to see what they sold or listed for, so that you say maybe what to list this one for, or what to advise your client to offer for that property based on what its market value.
Okay, you also spoke about an appraisal. Now, an appraisal is from the bank with a licensed appraiser?
Licensed appraiser, right.
Okay.
And they need the data just as much as real estate agents do.
Okay. Now, Dean, we talked about the numbers. Now, oftentimes, this happens in terms of trust. Older adults tend to trust their professionals more than younger people. We know that. So if the person is over 65 years old and it's not on a multiple listing service and they sell it for 150,000 lower, whether it's a 50,000 lower than it could be, the adult children might give you or someone like you a call and say, hey, I think we left money on the table.
Right. I mean, you also have a whole elder abuse potential there as well.
Exactly.
And I think that's a risk that you take as a licensee if you do that as well, especially with an older person. The age, to me, whether you trust or not, whether you're young or old, you're going to be trusting. I think you open yourself up to more exposure if you're older and you're not putting it on the MLS. And to kind of go back a little bit here is, I think also when you talk about appraisals and you talk about the person who's a little bit older or the principal, when you do that CMA or you do that appraisal, if you don't have that data as a comparable sale, so for example, if you have an off book or a pocket listing, that information may not make it to the public. So the appraiser down the street, when they're trying to appraise the property next door, that they won't pick up your appraisal, they won't pick up your purchase price to use that as a comparable for their appraisal, and that could affect the market.
Okay. CMA, you mentioned CMA. What does that stand for?
It's a comparative market analysis. It's a typical tool that real estate agents use in the industry to help their buyers and sellers determine what the house could sell for, what to purchase it for. They look at comparable sales in the area, for example, a street or a zip code or a school zone, and they say, hey, look, this one sold down the street for $1.2 million. This house is a little bit bigger. It's a better lot, better location, and you make a little small adjustments to determine a sort of fair purchase price or a fair offering price.
I see. Now, when you depose agents, do you ask for their CMA? Do you say, how did you arrive at these numbers?
Well, see, I get paid by the hour, so I take their whole entire file and I open it up and I have a big whiteboard and I get to go through their entire file, not just the CMA, but all the notes that goes through, and oftentimes you don't have a lot of notations about pocket listings. I sat here and explained. I have a lot of agents who will do diaries or have follow-up notes who say, hey, it's a pleasure seeing you. We talked about pocket listing. I know you want to have an exclusive listing and not put it on here, but here are the advantages and disadvantages. Here's the form. So when I see letters like those, it's harder for me as a lawyer to say, oh, wait a minute, the real estate agent didn't explain. And I also know that we all know that at least the principal knows, hey, listen, I'm doing this by my choice, as opposed to a real estate agent sort of pushing that trust along and trying to get that increased commission.
Right, yeah. In all fairness, I know your great uncle was the president of the California Association of Realtors, right?
He was.
So you know agents can do a good job for people.
Right.
And that's a part of getting back to those confirming notes. Your firm always spoke about confirming notes. After a meeting, it's nice to have, back in the day we would write the note in snail mail, and now we can pick up the phone or email.
It's so easy with email to do that, to send a little confirming note. And also I think it's a good marketing tool for real estate agents. I mean, you get your business, most real estate agents get their business by what? Referrals. And the better job you do in personalizing and making sure the principal knows I'm really crossing my T's and dotting my I's, the more chance you're going to get a referral downstream.
Okay, we want to talk about best practices here, but first I want to hit with Jim here on this wonderful slide your wonderful crew put together here. We're on number 7, page 7, on MLS sales. And now this was in the first quarter of 2012.
It was 87.7% were sold in the MLS system.
Inside the multiple listing service. Now we fast forward to Q1 of this year, 2018.
78% were sold in the MLS. The difference is the inventory levels have dropped considerably. And so as we see inventory levels drop, we see off MLS sales practices increase. It's become a business practice for a lot of people.
Become a business practice. Boy, that's scary. Now, let's go to page 8, off MLS. We had a peak here in the first quarter of 2013. What was the number on that?
Well, it's 26% were sold off the MLS.
Okay.
And that's kind of right in the middle of the recession where people were starting to get a little stingy with their properties, with their listings.
And that's a lot. There are fewer paychecks, and agents wanted to perhaps get 2 paychecks instead of 1, or the agencies were promoting it in office.
I think it's also harder for the buyer clients because at that particular time, if it's off book and you have a a buyer who wants to make an offer on the property and you don't have an agreement, you're going to submit an offer and the real estate agent doesn't have the right to a commission. Oftentimes you see buyers, real estate agents trying to get a buyer-broker agreement or trying to get a cooperation agreement, and so it'll affect the buyer's ability to get it as well.
Okay, that's a good point, Dean, because it's not fair to the buyers and the buyer's agents that are left out in the cold.
Right.
Okay, because we are all supposed to share this information and get our fair shot at it. So we often speak about how it's not fair for the seller and they left money on the table, but it's not fair. Is a good point that you brought up, because I've been on that on the representing buyers, and we didn't even have an opportunity to make an offer,
Right.
or view the home.
And oftentimes the buyers get upset because they say, "Hey, why didn't this house sold? Why didn't you know about it?"
Yes.
And you go,
all the
wait a
time.
minute, it was
they
not on
do.
the MLS.
It wasn't on
And
the-
I'm not part of this little group who, it's so, it can be a little cliquey, it can be a little, people are selfish, they want to only, work with certain agents because they may have some, as a lawyer, he talks about price fixing, there's a potential for price fixing and antitrust litigation. There's a whole host of things that could happen
Yes.
if you have certain groups, for example, who are setting the prices for commissions or setting the prices for homes.
Yes, yes.
Well, you have these private clubs.
Right?
Yes, we have those, and we spoke about that, and that was on some of the podcasts for the National Association of Realtors, California Association of Realtors, and of course back then I was, in all fairness, on your task force for the off-MLS issue that was coming about, that when these agents get together, they're 6 or 7 or 12 agents that like each other in a particular geographical zone, and they were sharing their listings and not sharing it outside to the other 100 or 200 in their zip code.
Right.
Okay, so that's where you speak about antitrust and price fixing.
Right, and also there comes, again, the whole breach of fiduciary duty issue, because it typically opens up a dual agency situation as well.
Okay. Now, what does this mean in real numbers? Jim, let's get to slide number 11. And billions of dollars off MLS. And by the way, how many counties do you cover?
We cover 5 counties.
5 counties around Silicon Valley.
Right. So San Mateo, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, San Benito, Monterey.
Okay.
And so in 2011, we had $2.5 billion worth of properties that were sold
Okay.
outside of the MLS.
That seemed, back then, it seemed like a lot. Okay, now, by the way, the sellers didn't even know they left money on the table, right? They were just happy to sell their house.
Right.
And they trusted their agent.
And I also think it's hard to prove. I mean, as a lawyer, you're going to be seeking the difference in value. And most time, how does an appraiser say if the house is listed for $1 million and you think you can get $1.2 million, $1.25 million, $1.3 million if you open the MLS? It's also hard to prove. So there's a bunch of tricky moving parts and issues from a legal standpoint.
In all fairness, there's a lot of moving parts, and we can get into that. Of course, a recent sale in the neighborhood is helpful too.
True.
Now, okay, let's back on this slide here, 11. Page 11, 2017, and billions of dollars off MLS. What do we get to?
5.9 billion
Wow.
sold off the MLS.
Okay. Now, that must be a lot of prominent people that were concerned about their property or their white carpet, right?
Or their privacy or their security.
Privacy. Okay. Because I've been doing this a long time. I remember at the beginning of the recession, I called to make an appointment to show a home, and I could tell a boy answered. He said, "Let me ask my parents," and I could hear him answer. It came back and said, "Yes, you can show it." And when I knocked on the door, the boy answered. I could tell he was not well, and his bedroom was full of hospital equipment. And I said, this family knew, in order to get top dollar for this property and get out from under these short sales and distressed property, they had to go on the MLS.
Right.
Okay. Now let's talk about the difference in numbers, if we could, Jim.
All right. Well, if you just look at 2017 for all 5 counties, if it was sold through the MLS, we got $950,000 in the median price range. If it was sold off the MLS, the median was $769,000, $180,000 worth of difference.
Now those charts look very similar, right, in terms of going back 5, 6, 7 years here.
Yeah, they've been growing. That practice has been growing since 2011.
Right. Now, in terms of, what did we wrap up in terms of the delta for 2017? What was the average?
Well, I didn't bring the average, just the median.
The median, excuse me, the median.
The median was $950.
Okay.
Sold through the MLS.
Now, on the slide here for 13, On MLS homes commanded how much more on average?
$180,000 more.
180,000. Now, you could buy a home in parts of California for 180,000. So that, in terms of when you depose an agent and you talk about these numbers, let's say you do have comparable sales and it's clear that the condo, townhouse, house, fourplex, whatever, could have commanded more had they exposed it to thousands of websites and 17,000 agents. What typically were we got a minute left here. What did the agents say on something like that?
Exactly every time. The client wanted it. They wanted to have it off. They wanted. That's typically it. There's a reason. The child is sick, or they didn't want people on the white carpet. There's usually a reason.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you might double check and say, well, did you explain they could sell it for more?
Exactly, and they say they did, and of course you have the seller saying that was never discussed. Right.
Okay. Dean Rossi, I want to thank you again for coming out.
Thank you.
Real estate attorney. Jim, thanks again for all you've done for the
welcome.
local MLS.
Thanks for having us here.
I know they have you at the National Association of Realtors often. Thank you for helping us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks again for watching Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We appreciate you watching the show. We will see you next week. Take care.